Many years ago, some friends of mine introduced me to something called the sovereign citizen movement. This was a time long ago before the internet, well, at least before the internet like we think of it now. This was at a time when we would order by mail obscure books from advertisements in the back of other obscure books. Some of these books I found incredibly interesting because they were incredibly different than anything I'd ever heard before. Don't get me wrong, I was skeptical. I certainly didn't believe everything I read, though some of the academic rigor did impress me. One of the schemes presented in these books was about cars and licenses and vehicle plates. I remember it being something about the difference between an automobile and a motor vehicle, and how a motor vehicle is licensed by the government, whereas an automobile is a piece of property that you own. And if only you were to purchase the automobile in the proper way, it would not be a motor vehicle, and thus you would not need a driver's license to drive it. A second had to do with getting an allodial title to your property that would, in essence, distance you legally from different legal jurisdictions. And if you had this allodial title, you could do things on your property that would otherwise be illegal, but it wasn't illegal because that title took you out of the state and county that you belonged to. Or something like that. Now, as I said before, I never believed this in any kind of a practical sense. I knew that trying to implement any of these types of schemes would most certainly land you in legal trouble. I do, however, occasionally wonder if some of the people who made these observations and studies were technically correct. I imagine that deep in the annals of some law book someplace, there may very well be some validity to some of these claims. However, I think one of the most important bits of wisdom that I took away from this is the understanding that even though you can be technically right all day long, it doesn't mean anything so long as other people with power don't believe you. Even if one of these people were completely and tactically right, in all actuality, no police officer or judge that you encounter is even going to give you a second thought if something conflicts too seriously with their deep-held beliefs on how things are. Even in the outrageous circumstance of them actually believing you, they're still not going to do anything that will deviate from policy. I'm fairly certain that this realization was one of the formative experiences of my political identity. Before this, I think I was disillusioned into thinking that a brilliant man in front of a court could get things to go the way that they were supposed to. Later in my life, I spent a great deal of time in family court, working with people who were going through divorces or who had been involved with DCFS, and quite frankly, it was a sham. One judge in particular would binge-watch Netflix, and you could see the reflection of the TV shows in her glasses as parents were desperately trying to get their kids back. I learned how much of our legal system was purely procedural. I think it's where I truly began to mistrust the mechanisms of government. Today, the thoughts of buying cars with gold coins is a comical memory, but I guess the wisdom of what contemplating that brought to me is kind of going to be very long-lasting.